Claire hesitantly stepped over the threshold of the prison cell, looked around cautiously. The atmosphere was oppressive, and the room was rather gloomy. There was a little light through a small barred window in the ceiling, and the walls were shabby, long unpainted. Along them were bunks. It smelled of sweat, mold, and some other filth. "What is your name, and why did you come to our sanatorium?" The most active of the prisoners addressed her. The girl could not utter a word out of fear. 20 pairs of female eyes looked at her, most of which were filled with hatred, anger, and indifference. She walked to the center of the cell, not knowing what to do next. "Are you deaf? Can't you hear the questions? What article were you convicted under?" The prisoner repeated her question. She approached Claire, touched her lush blonde hair. "Look, what a princess. It's been a long time since we've had such a princess in our kingdom. It's all right. Let's see what's left of your beauty in a couple days." "Claire, Article 111, Claire whispered quietly. Her eyes were dizzy with excitement. "They can't understand." "Wow, Claire. I can't tell you're almost a murderer. You're no joke," she said loudly and almost laughed. "Wretch, check her stuff. FIFA must have brought something special with her." A short woman with a scar on her left cheek grabbed Claire's duffel bag and began rummaging through it. The longer Claire stared at her, the more she looked like a rat in a dumpster. Her frisky friend did too. They were no different from each other. Small, evil eyes, big noses, and thin lips testified to their insolent and unscrupulous character. While the girl was studying her new acquaintances, the shabby girl pulled several handkerchiefs, socks, underwear, towels, and slippers from her sack. "Wendy, there's none of that here." The wretched one turned to her friend. "Well, no," Wendy replied and lay down on her bunk. It had been a long day. It was time to get some rest. Gathering her things, Claire quietly went deep into the cell to the empty bunks. There was only room on the second tier. She silently spread out the bedclothes, lay down on a pillow, and cried quietly. She realized that showing tears in the cell in front of these women was not only stupid, but dangerous. Not knowing how to cope with her accumulated emotions, she cried silently, not making a sound. Only tears traitorously left 2 wet streaks on her cheeks. At precisely 10 o'clock in the evening, they called a halt. Claire was awake, lying on her back with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. At that moment, she realized clearly that 6 years in prison with these women would not last. The cell became unbearably stuffy. Claire lifted her head, looking down. She wanted to lie back on the pillow, but suddenly she felt someone looking at her. It was quite dark in the cell, but despite that, she noticed a girl who appeared to be awake as well. She was lying on the lower bunks, waved her hand slightly, and smiled. Claire responded with a similar gesture and decided to meet her the next day. Alone with her thoughts, she remembered Ethan, whom she had caught a glimpse of as she was being led up to the prison wing. She hadn't remembered until then that he worked as a warden at the prison. It had been 4 years since their separation, but after that, he had never once inquired about her, about who she was with. However, she didn't like to go back to Ethan in her memories either. Their romance hadn't lasted long. During their college years, life seemed simple and carefree most of the time. Ethan and Claire met at a party at a friend's house. The young man began to court the girl, gave flowers, invited her on dates. He was in his 4th year of law school. Claire was going to become a music teacher and was only 3 years younger than him. 6 months later, Ethan proposed to Claire. She agreed, and the future newlyweds filed an application to the registry office. The wedding was to take place on July 25th, exactly 1 month later. At that time, Claire had no idea how her life would change in the near future. Returning from the institute in the evening, she accidentally stumbled, twisted her foot, and broke her heel. It was painful and uncomfortable to walk, so she limped to the nearest bench. The phone in Claire's hands traitorously made its last sound and completely discharged. It was at that moment that Steve noticed her. "Good evening, beautiful lady. I think you're going to need my help tonight. I'm Steve. What's your name?" He introduced himself. "Nice to meet you, Claire." Tears of pain were coming out of my eyes. "Don't cry. It doesn't suit you. I saw you walking and limping, but I couldn't come right away." He began to gently examine the girl's sore ankle. Yes, it looks like you've suffered a serious injury. I'll help you get to the hospital. I'll start the car. Just don't go anywhere. Where would I go? I can't do that, as much as I'd like to. Claire answered quietly and looked after her savior. Steve liked her at first sight. The tall, blue-eyed blonde man charmed Claire with his wide smile and willingness to help. A minute later, the young man drove up to Claire in a white Nissan and carefully placed her in the front seat. On the way, the girl found out that Steve owned several restaurants. The young man 2 years ago received a degree in economics, but did not want to work in his specialty. Always dreamed of opening my own business. So far, my business does not bring much money. Most of the earned profit has to be invested in the development of the business. But I'm not discouraged, Steve admitted. Claire listened to her new acquaintance and felt that she began to like him more and more. There was something attractive and unusual about him that she had never noticed in any man before. At the hospital, the girl was given the help she needed. When she got to her room, she put her phone on the charger and saw more than 20 missed calls from Ethan. Suddenly, she realized that since the moment she'd met the handsome stranger, she hadn't once thought about her fiancé or the wedding. She suddenly realized clearly that she didn't want to marry Ethan anymore. Steve called daily and looked forward to seeing her. When her leg was almost healed, she decided to meet at the nearest cafe. The young man was waiting for Claire with a huge bouquet of flowers. When he realized what thoughts tormented her, without hesitation, he offered to talk to Ethan and explain that he fell in love with Claire at first sight and would not give her up to anyone. But Ethan and Steve didn't manage to meet. Claire's fiancé urgently had to leave for family reasons in a neighboring town. Steve decided to take advantage of this and offered to simply run away, as in the movie. The girl explained to her parents for what reason she changed her mind about marrying Ethan. Said that she fell in love with another. The former fiancé wrote a letter in which she apologized for the suffering caused, wished him to find a good girl and find true happiness. Since then, she never saw Ethan again. She made a choice in favor of Steve, next to whom she hoped to find true happiness. The day in prison began at 9 o'clock in the morning. The warden's loud voice made the girl shudder. The quick preparation for the formation, the disgusting breakfast, and the unusual bustle were naturally unusual for Claire. The squad was working in the sewing room. Not knowing which way to approach the sewing machine, Claire stood by the table and watched as the other female prisoners sat down at their workstations and began their usual sewing. "Aren't you, new girl, going to work?" The warden's voice made her wake up. "Here's your place. No one here will fulfill your daily quota." Claire sat down at the typewriter and began to study its mechanism. More than anything, she hated sewing, even with her hands. And here she had to learn a whole science. "You don't know where you're going. But that's okay. A lot of people here have learned everything. You can do it," says the probation worker. "Kate, why don't you tell the new girl what's going on?" A brown-eyed girl came up to Claire, winked at her, and smiled. Claire recognized her as the one who had waved at her from downstairs the night before. "Hi, my name is Kate. I'm going to show you how to work the machine. We're sewing mittens. They're not that hard to make. Just watch your fingers." Kate started explaining. Claire managed to sew several pairs of mittens before lunch. She had her work cut out for her, but it was the unkind looks from her cellmates that worried her most. Wendy and Pam, her friend from yesterday, were keeping an eye on her. "Your name is Claire, isn't it?" the girl asked her as they sat down at the lunch table. "You keep your nose clean and eat what you're given. Of course, it's not a restaurant here, but you have to eat. You won't eat the last of your strength since you're losing it. How can you eat this? It's just some slop with a couple of potatoes and carrots." Claire objected and tried to push the plate away. But Kate gestured decisively to put the plate back where it belonged. "You don't seem to realize where you're going, do you? You're not going to last long in here. Listen to me. If you want to survive, you have to eat what you're given and obey the local rules." Claire had no choice but to pick up a spoon and start eating. After shoveling the contents of her plate into her mouth, Claire got up from the table. After lunch, they announced a walk. How could one call it a walk, though? Walking through an area surrounded on all sides by high brick walls. The sky overhead was the only evidence that there was life somewhere. The sun was shining, and people felt happiness, love, and hope for a bright future, in addition to longing, horror, and hopelessness. Suddenly, Kate said, "I look at you and I cannot understand how you could get here. It's written all over your forehead that you wouldn't hurt a fly. Who were you trying to kill?" I didn't kill anybody, and I didn't even try. I was set up. Really? All right. Will you tell me all about it tonight? Kate whispered, noticing the wretched woman nearby. They're the ones testing you. Nodding at her, Kate tried to reassure her. You didn't act right last night. People like Wendy and Miserable love it. To pick on people like you. You show a little slack once, they don't get off your back. You'll be their servant for the rest of your sentence. How long have they been here? Claire asked. A long time. Why don't you ask me how long and why? Claire whispered. Miserable's on her third time for theft, and Wendy's doing time for double murder. They're scary women, they're capable of anything. What are you in here for? Claire asked another question hesitantly. I'm doing time for someone else too. Do you know how much I loved him? My John, I thought, was the best man in the world. By the way, we worked together, but I suddenly found out he had a mistress. The thing is, I was an EMT. One day there was an emergency call for a woman who had an acute attack of renal colic. We put on the siren and rushed to the call. When we entered the apartment, we saw a woman lying unconscious, around which, not finding a place, a man was thrashing around, sobbing voice, begging us to help her as soon as possible. What was my amazement when I recognized my husband in the suffering man. Yes, it was John. I don't remember how I ran out of the apartment, how I took him somewhere, how I found myself at home a few hours later. And then what happened? Claire asked. Then Kate continued in a dull voice. I was fired for leaving a sick person without help, and John and his mistress wrote to the prosecutor's office against me. They said that I had left a sick person without help when she was in danger of death. That resulted in a conviction and a 2-year sentence. And still, deep down I feel that John still loves me, that he was temporarily under the influence of this woman, as under hypnosis. Time will pass and he will wake up and not betray my love. In a few months I'll come out, see him, and everything will be back to normal. And I'll be here for 6 years, Claire said wistfully. If only there was something to do. The cell was quiet in the evening just before lights out. The women were resting after the day's work, each doing her own thing. Claire was sitting on her bed writing a letter to her parents. Suddenly Wendy came over to her and snatched the piece of paper out of her hands. You, princess, probably didn't understand what was said to you, she said loudly to the girl. What did the wretch tell you? To do my bidding. And did you do what was asked of you? All the women in the cell turned toward Wendy. I did my part, Claire answered as boldly as possible and made it clear that the conversation was over. What did you say? Wendy didn't expect to hear such an answer. She got up right away and apologized to me. Tell me you won't do it again and you'll do it right tomorrow. I won't apologize and I won't do your errands either. The girl realized that she had sicked the insolent cellmate on herself with her answer and prepared to defend herself. Wow, our princess is getting bolder. Just yesterday she was bleating like a sheep, and today she's fluffing her feathers, Wendy. She looked angrily at Claire and suddenly lunged at her. But Claire was much more nimble than she had expected, and she threw herself on the other side of the bed. Then the girl quickly stood up and found herself in the center of the cell. She stared defiantly at her abuser and prepared to attack. It seemed to her that the woman before her was not a woman, but a fierce beast with bloodshot eyes. Wendy stood 3 steps away from Claire and prepared to pounce on her, but her attempt failed. The warden appeared in the cell and called it quits. But watch it, asshole. You're gonna get it from me, Wendy whispered, heading towards her seat. When the cell was quiet, Claire cautiously walked down to Kate. Well done, Claire. You didn't let yourself get hurt. Kate praised her. But don't overdo it. Don't give in to those witches. But don't go overboard. But what happened on the outside? Whose crime did you end up here for? You know, Kate, it's someone else's fault I'm in here, Claire continued. I was accused of poisoning one of my husband's business partners. My Steve owns a chain of restaurants in town. A few months ago, his business partner came to visit him. I was at that meeting too. A table was set up for the guest at one of the restaurants, and at the end of the evening the man became ill. We called an ambulance, and later we learned that his food had been laced with a drug that could have caused cardiac arrest. It was only by a miracle that he survived, although his health was compromised after all that had happened. After a search in the glove compartment of my car, the investigators found a vial of this very drug. The most surprising thing is that my fingerprints were found on it. I can't find an explanation for all this to this day. My husband was also involved in the case, but for lack of evidence, the charges against him were dropped. But I was in a lot of trouble. The investigation didn't last long. A couple weeks later, the trial was held, and I was sentenced to 6 years. The court felt that I had decided to get him out of the way for my own personal gain. I signed the contract with my husband's injured partner myself because my restaurants, which Steve had given me, worked most closely with him. You still have no idea who benefited from all this? Kate wondered. No, I have no idea. Claire sighed wistfully and closed her eyes. I also met my ex-boyfriend here, the one I ran away from the night before the wedding. Is he our probation officer? Kate was even more surprised. No, his name is Ethan. I saw him when I was being led through the prison grounds to our building after the inspection. He probably works in the next building, keeping order in the other squad. Oh, come on, Claire, Kate whispered. You must have really hurt his feelings. If you did, you're not going to have a fairy tale life. That's what I'm afraid of. I haven't seen him since we broke up. He wasn't a bad man. He adored me. And as it turns out, I didn't love him enough. This new feeling came over me like an avalanche. I wrote him a letter and never saw him again. Claire saw a picture of a handsome young man on the wall next to the bunk. Is that your John? Yes, that's my John. Kate smiled. Really, he's my handsome one, the best-looking one in the world. Yes, he's handsome. One might even say, too handsome for a man. From Claire's point of view, his eyes, even in a photograph, gave him away as a man of no integrity. Days and nights in the prison were not varied. The women got up, ate breakfast, and worked. But Claire could not get used to these walls, nor to her new surroundings. It was good that Kate was always there. They were never bored together. Claire, do you have someone on the outside to carry your gear? Just to visit once in a while? I asked Kate's girlfriend the other night. She was worried she hadn't gotten anything lately. I've got a friend, Rose, but she's very busy at the moment. I've given her all the work I can't do right now. Did Steve need help? Claire replied sadly. Had Steve written that off? Kate asked. I don't think he made much effort to get me out. I told him I didn't want the business. Claire sad again. Oh, I wish I could take my case up and get a review. Don't worry. I don't have long to sit here. I'll be out soon and I'll do your job for you. John won't mind, I think. He'll help us. Kate tried to reassure her friend. I'll owe you a favor. Kate thanked Claire. By the way, I wanted to remind you not to let your guard down. I think Wendy's with the mean one. They've only been quiet for a while. I'm afraid they're up to something. Wendy's a very vindictive woman who doesn't forgive wrongs, Kate warned. Be careful. A woman whose bunk was right next to Kate's intervened. I heard today that they want to catch Claire and punish her. Lara, are you sure you heard that? Kate asked. Is that how you are right now? Thanking Lara for the warning, the girls decided to be more careful and always stick together. The next day, Claire was called to the visiting room. There's someone here to see you, the warden commanded. Rose, Claire's friend, had booked the date. The girl seemed a little nervous, probably because she'd never seen the dark walls of a prison before. Claire, hi. How are you holding up? I brought you some groceries, so tell me what's new. Thank you. I don't know what's new. I'm just sitting around, Claire said, and then she stopped talking. Listen, you just do not despair. Everything will be resolved somehow. Rose began to comfort her friend. It's not going to work out. Rose interrupted Claire abruptly. We have to do something. Why doesn't Steve come to see me? Can't he do something to help me? Well, don't worry. He'll visit you next time. I've just got a lot on my plate. I'm new to your business. I don't understand a lot of things, so Steve has to deal with my work too. But we're getting by. Rose is making excuses. I'm sorry, Rose, I'm only thinking of myself. Of course, it's not easy for you either. It's just that I'm sitting here unjustly while a real criminal walks free. At these words, Claire's voice broke and she sobbed. Rose did her best to comfort her friend, promising that they would do everything possible to have the case pulled from the archives and sent for further investigation. Soon she was handed a parcel, in which the girl found sausage, candy, tea, cigarettes, and other products. She shared the cigarettes with Wendy, hoping that she could soothe her hurt ego. Wendy took the cigarettes, but she didn't even think of calming down. She had a revenge plan brewing in her head that she couldn't wait to carry out. Saturday was traditionally bath day at the prison. Only a common shower room with slightly warm water and a bathhouse could hardly be called a bathhouse. But Clare relished every opportunity to bathe. That day she stayed in the shower stall longer than usual. The water was surprisingly hot, and it was possible not only to warm up, but also to wash more thoroughly than usual. Kate, figuring that her friend had made it back to her cell earlier, left the shower quietly. Such an opportunity could not but be taken advantage of by Wendy and the wretched one. No sooner had Clare stepped out of the stall than she slipped on the wet floor. The wretch tripped her, and Wendy began to beat her viciously with whatever she had, and kicked Clare's feet as she lay on the floor. After a second blow to the head, the girl lost consciousness. There's no telling how it might have ended if Kate and Lara hadn't come running into the shower room a few minutes later. Miserable stood near the door and spotted them just in time. As Clare's friends ran up the stairs, Wendy and Miserable fled through the back exit. "Oh my God, Clare, are you okay? Are you alive?" Kate wailed in horror. Together with Lara, they stood over Clare and did not understand how such a thing could be done to a human being in a short time. Lara ran to call for help, while Kate stayed in the shower room. Clare's face was drenched in blood, her arms and shoulders too. Through her thin shirt she could see the marks of a brutal beating. "But don't think you're going to get away with it, Wendy." Lara was followed into the shower room by the warden and the prison doctor. The doctor examined the girl and decided to put her in the infirmary for a while. Behind the backs of everyone present, another man stood for a short time. He silently watched everything that was going on and quietly disappeared behind the door. When she woke up in her new place, Clare didn't immediately realize where she was. She could only guess from the smell of medicine that she was in the local hospital. Trying to move her arm, the girl felt a sharp pain. After half an hour, it took the whole body. The effect of painkillers gradually passed, and Clare could hardly restrain herself from screaming. Her head hurt especially badly. Nausea was coming up to her throat. Unable to bear it all, the girl groaned loudly. It seemed that a little more, and she would lose consciousness. A moment later, Clare noticed that a man in a white coat, unfamiliar to her, was standing in front of her. He was no more than 35 years old. "You, doctor, tell me, what's wrong with me?" "I've never felt so bad before," she whispered with difficulty. "It's good you're talking at all. Ideally, you should have a CT scan of your brain. But we can't afford that luxury," the doctor said. And he felt her forehead. "We should check her temperature again. You've been wandering around all night. Her temperature's up to 39. Wouldn't come down. You took the brunt of the blow to the head. You probably have a severe concussion." Clare realized she hadn't heard a human being speak so nicely in a long time. And most importantly, she was being treated as a human being, not as the dregs of society. Through her sleep, she heard the doctor's dialogue with a strange woman. Most likely it was the warden Louise. Clare lay on the bed and diligently listened to the conversation between these two complete strangers. "Jack, I'd ask you to be more economical with your medication. I realize the prisoner had multiple bruises, but they heal like dogs." In a commanding voice, the warden reprimanded the doctor. "Yes, this is a prison. But don't forget, Louise, my patients are human beings too. They're women first." The doctor tried to reason with the cruel boss. "I don't want to hear any of it. You want to treat people? Go to the district hospital." Louise's voice was getting louder and louder. After a few minutes, she left the infirmary and the doctor went about his daily business. Clare thought bitterly. Even medicines are spared on people like us. With heavy thoughts, the girl fell into a deep sleep and slept until morning. The next morning, her body ached all over. Also, her face was streaming, and she hardly opened her eyes. It seemed to Clare that she was not lying in bed, but was flying somewhere far away, and all the objects in the room were flying after her. Clare remembered an overheard conversation between the doctor and her boss, that Jack was probably a good man, trying to stand up for his imprisoned patients, she thought. And for some reason, that thought made her feel warmer. Perhaps she had really missed sincere sympathy and care. "But how are you feeling?" The doctor's voice made the girl shudder. Jack appeared in the room unexpectedly. With difficulty opening her eyes, she looked at the doctor and saw Ethan behind his back. He was silent. From surprise, Claire couldn't utter a word either. The only question on her mind was, what was he doing here? Claire looked at Ethan and he looked at her. It seemed like an eternity ago. But hello, Claire. I never thought I'd see you here. When I saw you being led into the next building, I couldn't believe it, but I pretended I didn't know you. Can you tell me now what happened to you while you were here? I've been able to get all the details of your case, but I'd like to hear your side of the story too. Yeah, I can't think of a better way to talk. The only thing scarier, perhaps, is me in my present form. The girl tried to joke. She grimaced in pain, her body aching and her head refusing to think. I understand, Claire, but to try to help you, I need to know everything. Tell me, you're not guilty of what you're accused of, are you? Ethan asked and touched Claire's hand. She felt the warmth of the hands of the guy she was going to marry. Claire looked at Ethan and wanted to believe that he forgave her and sincerely wanted to help her, although she realized that she did not deserve such an attitude. It wasn't my fault, she whispered softly, but I don't understand who benefited from my imprisonment. It all happened so quickly. Before I knew it, I was in the dunks. And what did they beat you for? Ethan asked. Claire looked at him. A faint smile appeared on her lips. Probably because I was a princess. Some of the local authority figures don't like me, or rather, authority women. They say I'm different from the others, although I'd agree with them now. You can't find a pretty girl like me in this colony. You're kidding, so you're on the mend. Ethan smiled back. But you know, in order to prevent this from happening again, don't tell anyone who did this to you. If you don't pawn now, maybe they'll back off and respect you. I know it's hard to forgive, but you'll save your life. I get it, Claire agreed. And then she moaned again. Be patient, Claire, but you still haven't told me if there's anyone on the outside who would try to restore your case. Claire repeated her question. I don't know. My husband's not available. A friend promised to run around, but so far no word. Parents in these matters, I do not want to get involved. They've been through enough. I write them letters telling them I'm doing fine. I work as a probation officer in the next building. I can't make a date with you, you know. If any of your cellmates find out that you and I know each other, you'll be in trouble too. Nevertheless, I'll try to help you in any way I can, Ethan said. He said goodbye to the girl and left the room. Claire was alone with her thoughts. She realized that she didn't know her ex very well. If Ethan was sincere at such a moment, Claire lost a beautiful man, abandoned and humiliated him. In such a situation, instead of laughing at her, he offered his help. Only a real man could do that. The more Claire thought about Ethan, the worse she felt. It seemed to her that the pain in her body had become symbolic compared to the pain in her soul. Tears slid uncontrollably down her cheeks again, leaving a slightly visible pink due to the unhealed abrasions on her cheeks. Well, now that we've talked, it's time to eat. Jack had brought food for Claire himself. She felt uncomfortable with this concern. She tried to hold the spoon herself and struggled to get it to her mouth. She didn't want to eat, but she decided to heed the doctor's advice, who said that without food her strength would run out and it would be difficult for her to recover, and Claire wanted to get better. Claire stayed in the infirmary for 10 days. Of course, she had not recovered completely, but she felt quite well. She often recalled the words of the warden that she should heal like a dog. Several times the warden had come to her and questioned her about who had been abusing her. Taking Ethan's advice, Claire didn't bother to give Wendy and the blight away. Life was really more important. Ethan never came again, but Claire felt his presence on an intuitive level. Back in her cell, she immediately realized that Wendy and the squalor had begun to treat her differently. Most likely, they really realized that there was nothing to dislike their new cellmate for, especially since she hadn't turned them into her superiors, and it didn't look like she was going to. Kate's term was coming to an end. On the one hand, Claire was happy for her friend. She could see how happy Kate was, dreaming of meeting her John. But on the other hand, she knew that it would be very difficult for her in the colony without her. Of course, she'd made friends with Lara there too, but Kate was the same age as her, bolder and more fun. If it hadn't been for Kate, Claire would hardly have survived the first days and weeks in the colony. The morning of another day was most ordinary. Heading to work in the sewing room, the girls felt that the air outside was different. They could clearly smell the odor of the approaching spring. They breathed it in full and even closed their eyes in pleasure. The warden's voice made the girls open their eyes and return to reality. Do you need a special invitation to work? Do you want to earn a double ration? Claire and Kate realized they had fallen behind. Claire had gotten used to sewing during her time in the colony. The work no longer seemed as difficult as it had before. Fixing her headscarf, she set to work. Suddenly, 2 warders entered the shop. One of them was Sam. He always worked in their squad, and the other stood with his back to Claire. But the girl immediately realized that it was Ethan. After a minute, Ethan turned around, and he and Sam began to move between the tables where the prisoners were working. Ethan only looked at Claire for a second, but even so, she realized that he had come here for a reason. Ethan stealthily handed her the note, walked around the shop with Sam, and then disappeared behind the door. Claire couldn't wait to read the note, but she realized that it might be seen by those who didn't want to know. She ran around the corner of the building and unfolded the small piece of paper. Claire, I expect you tonight at midnight sharp behind the second building. I'll turn off the video cameras. We can't be seen. I have the key to your camera. I'll open the door around 1:15 midnight. It's Sam's birthday today. He invited me to celebrate. He'll probably have a drink and sleep till morning. The warden's not supposed to be in juvie at night. We need to talk. It's important. I'll leave the key to the cell door in the lock. When you go out, don't forget to lock the door behind you. There was nothing else in the note. What was it Ethan wanted to talk about so urgently? Did he really know anything about my case? Claire wondered. It was an unusual day for Kate. The workday had just come to an end, and the women had some time on their hands. There's someone here to see you on your way out. The loud voice of the warden Sam made all the inhabitants of the cell shudder. Make it quick. It's past visiting time. You only have a few minutes to talk. Claire noticed that Sam was very unhappy with the unknown visitors in the evening. Normally that wasn't allowed, but that day must have been a special occasion. Claire was the only one who knew that the warden was anxious to celebrate his birthday, and the extra worry was a particular burden to him. Kate quickly collected herself, winked at Claire, and left the cell. She couldn't figure out who needed her so urgently. Her acquaintances and relatives hadn't spoiled her with their visits lately. Hoping to see John in the visiting room, she eagerly opened the door and saw her older sister, Julia. Julia, what's wrong? Why did you want to see me so urgently? She asked in surprise. Julia sat on the chair and looked at Kate with a strange look. What exactly was reflected in her gaze? Kate could not yet understand. Anxiety, tears, fear, and hope all mixed in her sister's eyes and did not bode well. I need to talk to you. I've been struggling to get a date with you. It's very important. Julia struggled. What's wrong? Kate asked impatiently and looked at her sister carefully. You'll be free in a week. What are your plans for the future? Julia asked. Plans? Nothing much. I'll go back to work if they'll let me start as a nurse. I'm hoping to meet John, Kate said confidently. Why do you care so much? The thing is, Julia hesitated, not knowing how to continue the conversation and explain everything that had happened to her sister so that she understood everything from the first time and did not ask unnecessary questions. John had another job, another life, and another woman. Julia looked at her sister with a long look. What other woman? Stammering with surprise, Kate asked, What about me? Well, we'll think with him how to move on. Yes, Julia, do not worry. The main thing is that now I will be free, you know. Free. I can't wait to get out of these walls and get some rest. Sweet, non-prison air. Kate, you misunderstand me. John is a completely different person now. You're just a burden to him. Julia tried to clarify the situation. And he has a woman too. You didn't think that all these 2 years John would live alone and wait for your return, did you? He's a healthy man. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you, Kate? No, not really. Suddenly catching the meaning of her sister's words, Kate said, You mean that now John has a new job, a new love, a new girl, a new life? And I'm a girl from my past life. Now he doesn't need me. I ruined my life. I did 2 years for him, and now he doesn't need me. Kate laid her head down on her chest without strength. The unexpected news made her dizzy. It seemed to her that one more minute and her heart would fail. Kate, have you always been strong? Stronger than me? I'm the weak one. Julia tried to bring her sister to her senses. Can you take it? You hear me? You just need to know that things are going to be different now. Who is she? Who is this girl John is living with now? Kate raised her head sharply and looked questioningly at Julia. And you don't have a clue yourself? Julia asked and looked at Kate again. This is the same mistress, together with whom they wrote a statement on you to the prosecutor's office. Do you remember a year and a half ago you asked me to get some certificates from your job? So, I went to your ambulance station, took the certificates from the personnel department, went out to the yard, and then I got so weak that I sat down on the bench at the entrance. And there were 2 nurses sitting nearby, as I understood from your team, and they were talking about nothing, when suddenly I heard your name and John's name. I listened. I didn't get it right away, but then I got the whole picture. From their chatter I learned that John and his mistress had literally invented a method of getting rid of a woman he was sick of. I mean, you. The thing is, knowing your psyche, he took everything into account, down to the last detail. They played out the mise-en-scene of an acute attack of renal colic in Madame. They called an ambulance with you in it. To get the call to you, he bribed and persuaded the dispatcher for a small sum of money. The whole thing was played out like a playbook. Kate looked hopelessly at her sister. I was sitting here while they made their own life at my expense. That's why John didn't have time for me, and he stopped visiting me. Kate, calm down. It just happened, okay? It just happened, Julia said and cried. Bonus. It's Kate and get on with your life. Do we have a deal? They won't. Don't think I'm going to leave them alone. They'll be held accountable for everything. They're sneaky, corrupt, traitors. Thanks for the heads up. I have a few more days to think about it. You bet I will, and I will find a way to move on. They won't get any peace, you know that. Julia listened to her sister and realized that during 2 years in the colony, Kate had learned to stand up for herself. Now, Kate was not the kind of girl who would obediently go to slaughter and let strangers take charge of her life. Looking at Kate's crushed anger at the news, Julia began to truly ache for her sister. She realized that she would make Igor and his woman answer for everything. How she reached the cell, Kate didn't remember. Her little world had collapsed in a matter of minutes. She realized that she had been deceiving herself all this time. These thoughts made her heart grow heavier by the second. Clare and Lara couldn't understand what had happened to her, so after several attempts to calm Kate down, they decided not to go into her soul, but just to wait for her to calm down. After a while, Kate fell asleep. Clare and Lara silently guarded her sleep, but she didn't get much sleep. Half an hour later, the warden ordered the formation for dinner. Kate opened her eyes with difficulty, remembered everything that had happened, and staggered out of the cell. Are you sick? You walk like a beaten dog, limping on all 4 legs. Sam turned to her and laughed loudly. Apparently, he hadn't expected himself to come up with such a comparison. Kate didn't answer. She was dizzy and her ears were ringing. In the dining room, she couldn't swallow a bite. Only when she got back to the cell, she could tell her friends about everything that had happened. That's how it is, girls, when you value someone more than yourself, said Lara, listening to Kate's monologue. Young people, you don't know life yet, do you? He's kind of slippery, Claire said. Although I've only seen him in pictures. He's probably worse in person. Don't you see? I loved him. I probably still do, Kate sobbed. But Kate, you've got to pull yourself together and think about how you're going to live your life. There's a reason your sister came here with us today. It's better for you than out there on your own. Where are you going to live? As I understand it, you had an official apartment, and you automatically lost it when you were fired, Claire asked her. I don't know yet. Honestly, if someone had told me this morning that I wouldn't want to leave, I would have thought I was crazy. Now I don't want to be free. It's all so familiar and familiar, Kate said sadly. Don't be silly, Claire interrupted her. What could be more horrible than this place? In a couple of days, Kate, you'll have a new life. You'll love a decent man and you'll be happy. Yeah, I don't have much to look forward to yet, but I'm going to have to work very hard to forget all this. The big question for today is, where am I going to live? Kate agreed with Claire. We have a few more days to figure that out. We'll figure something out, Claire assured her. Now look what I've got. She continued and added that at midnight tonight she should try to leave the cell unnoticed. It's very dangerous, Lara warned her. People like me, for example, are already asleep at that time, But there are others who always have their ears to the ground. You mean Wendy and her friend? Kate asked. Yeah, who else? Claire, you almost died at their hands. Be careful, Lara said and looked toward Wendy. The women were sitting across from each other talking as usual. They had calmed down and lost interest in me, Claire assured her friends. Claire lay under the blanket with her clothes on. She knew she wouldn't be able to pull on her pants and shirt in the middle of the night. Time stretched like rubber. Finally, it was midnight. Good thing Lara was sleeping on the first tier. If someone else had been there, it would have been impossible to get down without making noise. Claire went down as quietly as possible. Lara was still awake, too. She shook her hand silently. The girl tiptoed to the cell door and checked to see if it was indeed as Ethan had promised. It was open. Everything had been done exactly as promised. So Ethan had succeeded quietly. Locking the door behind her, Claire turned the key in the lock on the hallway side and stepped outside. Ethan was waiting for her at the designated spot. Well, did you do everything as I said? He asked the girl. I hope no one saw you? I don't think so, Claire answered. What was so important you wanted to tell me? If it wasn't important, I wouldn't have called you, Ethan whispered quietly. Claire, you're in danger. You have a terrible enemy on the loose who wants to destroy you. The other day I accidentally witnessed someone else's conversation. I had urgent business that I couldn't solve without the head of the colony. I wanted to go to her office and suddenly I heard your name. I decided to listen to what they were talking about. The colony governor was talking about me in the office, Claire wondered. Don't interrupt and listen to me carefully. There were two women talking. One of them is Louise, who you know well. The other I don't know. The thing is, this stranger offered Louise a large sum of money for your life. She asked me to find a way to kill you, to make it look like an accident. When the stranger left the office, I hid around the corner. But unfortunately, I didn't manage to see the customer. Louise escorted her to the door, went out into the corridor, and looked out the window until her guest disappeared from sight. How? You mean that the warden of the colony decided to kill me? She won't do it herself, of course. She has inmates who will do what she wants. I heard that conversation yesterday. So she could have ordered one of your cellmates to take you out today. If not today, they'll do it tomorrow. Your life in juvie is worthless. You'll be destroyed and washed up. Remember, you've got no enemies left on the outside. No, I'm telling you, no, I didn't cross anyone. I worked even if it wasn't my dream job, but I was good at it. Although maybe one of our competitors decided to take me out. But what good would that do? Everything I own will automatically go to my husband when I die. Why would some woman order my murder? Claire pondered. I think you left a lot more secrets on the outside than you realize. Ethan said quietly and thought for a moment. I think I've thought of something. Remember the Dr. Jack? He is the most human of the colony staff. I think he can help us. Your job is to pretend to be sick. Do it first thing in the morning. I'll explain the situation to the doctor, and he'll do what he thinks is right. And if he doesn't agree? Claire asked, looking anxiously at Ethan. We don't have time to assume anything. Remember, tomorrow morning you're going to have a sudden spike in your temperature. Make sure they believe you, and the warden will take you to the infirmary. You'll be safe there for the first time. Try not to sleep tonight. You never know. Be as vigilant as you can, understand? Now get back in there. She made it back to her cell without any trouble. She didn't undress, quietly stepped under the blanket and froze. The cell was quiet. Thank God it worked, Claire thought. But what to do now? I had never thought that someone would interfere with me to such an extent that they would order me and give me money for my murder. Who was this woman? What had I done to her? Ethan forbade Claire to sleep that night, but she couldn't sleep. Heavy thoughts kept her awake until the morning. After rising, Claire pretended to be sick, lay on the bunk, pressed her legs to her stomach, and moaned. Everyone gathered around her. The heavy moans of the girl frightened them all. One of them called the warden, and soon Claire was lying in the familiar ward of the infirmary. Jack examined her carefully, took her temperature, felt her abdomen, and understood nothing. Claire responded to the pain with every pressure he gave her. Lie down for a while, I can't diagnose you yet. I'll be with you in about half an hour. Drink some water and try to calm down. I don't know what's wrong with your stomach, but your blood pressure is definitely high, the doctor said. And he left Claire alone in the room. He came to her only after an hour. The girl even thought she'd been forgotten. Jack looked at her differently this time. There was anxiety and puzzlement in his gaze. "Claire, I got a letter from Ethan. I now understand why I couldn't diagnose you," the doctor said quietly to her. The doctor didn't have time to add anything. The head of the colony appeared behind him and looked angrily at the girl. "Jack, this is not a prison, but a sanatorium," she said angrily to the doctor. "You're wrong, Louise. The prisoner is here for a reason. I suspect she has appendicitis." As calmly as possible, the doctor answered her. "How long do you plan to keep her here?" Her boss wasn't going to let him get away with it. "As long as it takes. You know, I took the Hippocratic Oath. It doesn't matter to me who I treat. All patients are the same to me," the doctor replied confidently. "All right. You're our good man. I will visit you more often than usual and check the treatment process personally," Louise whispered and left the room, slamming the door loudly behind her. "Claire, I think Ethan is right. You shouldn't stay in the colony for a day. Louise didn't just walk in here. You and your sudden illness messed up her plans," he explained, and sat down in the chair next to her bunk. "You'll stay here tonight, and you can stay here tomorrow. But beyond that, your stay in the infirmary will become too suspicious. We'll have to figure out a way to get you out of the colony." "Do you think that can be done?" the girl asked hesitantly. "Nothing is impossible. Tonight we'll discuss with Ethan again how we can do it. And you rest. And pretend to be sick." The doctor answered her and left the room. The sleepless night had taken its toll. When she felt safe, Claire fell asleep. She slept so soundly that she didn't notice the doctor coming in a few more times. When Claire opened her eyes, it was already dark outside the window. Her body went quiet and she wanted to get out of her bunk and stretch. Fortunately, she didn't have time to do that. Outside the door, she heard the voice of Louise, who, as promised, came with another inspection. When her boss entered the room, Claire closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. "Keep your voice down. The patient is asleep." I gave her a sleeping pill. The pain in her abdomen kept her awake. "Let me take her to the city hospital for an examination." The doctor turned to Louise. "No way. I don't think you'll need an examination. Your patient is sleeping a sound and healthy sleep. She'll wake up tomorrow and you can send her back to her cell first thing in the morning. You hear that, Jack?" At that moment, Claire decided to pretend she was awake from a sharp pain and moaned pitifully. "Doctor, please help me. Doctor, I'm sick. Do something," the girl repeated, hoping that her boss would believe that she was really sick. "You see, Louise, the patient is in a terrible state. What if she doesn't survive until morning? How will you explain the death of your prisoner to your superiors?" The doctor began to inquire. "But if it comes to that, I'll explain it somehow. You'll have to explain too. In any case, I'll come early in the morning and see if she's alive. If she's dead, it's her fate," Louise replied sternly. When Claire and the doctor were alone in the room, Jack shaded the windows first, and only then did he approach his patient and shake her hand. "Good job, Claire. Keep up the act. You're good at it. Even the ruthless one almost believed you were serious," he said and blushed. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've ever been on a first-name basis. I'm more comfortable that way." "Thanks, Jack, for your help. I don't know what I would have done without you all," Claire replied gratefully. "Well, that's a deal," Jack said and smiled at her. It was already late at night when Ethan appeared in the infirmary. He shook the doctor's hand and went into the room. Jack locked the hospital door and, without turning on the lights, joined Claire and Ethan in telling them about the visits of the colony chief. "I think I've figured out a way for Claire to get out of the colony," Ethan said. "They should be bringing food to the kitchen tomorrow. You know who usually brings them. Tim has been doing it for years. Every time he comes in his gazelle," Jack remembered. "That's him. I'm off tomorrow. I'll take the shift at 8 in the morning and I'll wait for Tim outside the cafeteria. He should be here at 9. I'll ask him to give me a ride home. The cafeteria is not far from the infirmary. I'll think of some reason and ask him to stop by the infirmary. You don't have anything to load in the gazelle, but not in the back. The cab. We'll have to think about it. It has to be something heavy," Jack said. "You think about what it could be," continued Ethan. "So, we're going to carry it away from you. Claire needs to hide in the back of the car quickly. I'll try to make it so that the tent, on one side, will not be caught, and you, Claire, can easily get inside. Got it. Ethan looked at the girl carefully. Claire nodded. What if the guard sees me? She turned to Ethan. You have to make sure he doesn't notice. Stand near the door behind the coat rack, and that's where he won't see you. As soon as we get to Jack's cabin, you get right out and jump in the back. Next, if it pleases fate, you will go outside the colony, and I will ask Tim to drive me home and again help me carry back to the apartment what our good doctor will give me. You will jump out of the back of the truck at that time and wait for me behind the house. But don't run far away so I won't have to look for you. But the good doctor came up with the idea that tomorrow you will send from the colony, jokingly asked Ethan. Only weights come to mind. If you put them in that box in the corner. You won't be able to do it without Tim's help. Jack grinned. Great idea. Ethan supported the doctor. And how do I explain to the boss when she realizes that Claire is missing? Suddenly remembered the doctor. You'll tell her that on her orders you sent the girl back to the cell this morning. You don't know what happened to her. You are just a doctor. It is not your job to guard prisoners, Ethan explained. After making all the preparations, Ethan went to his post, and Jack lay down on the next bunk and tried to sleep. At 6 a.m, Jack was up. Claire was awake too and waited impatiently for the gazelle to pull up to the infirmary. From time to time she went to the window and looked out into the yard. Claire, you should go to bed. There's no telling who might show up at the infirmary. If you're seen in good health, you'll be back in your cell in no time, Jack reminded her. Agreeing with him, Claire went to bed and counted the seconds until Ethan arrived. At precisely 8 a.m, the warden showed up at the infirmary again. She was clearly eager to work off the money she'd received and get rid of the prisoner, and our princess, still asleep. Her forehead is perfectly normal. Why are you babysitting her, for God's sake? She turned to the doctor nervously. Send her to a cell immediately. That'll be the end of it. Louise, I just gave a patient an injection and brought down her temperature. This morning she was covered in vapors and almost delirious. Jack began to compose himself. Doctor, I repeat for the last time in 1 hour, I want her out of here. I'll check it personally, Louise commanded. Immediately after she left, Claire jumped out of bed, clutching her head. I know who she ordered to kill me. Louise called me princess. That's what only Wendy and Miserable call me around here, the girl guessed. End of story, she says. But no, they won't wait for me in the cell. Ethan called 15 minutes later and said that Tim had already unloaded and they would soon be near the infirmary. About 20 minutes later, a gazelle pulled up outside the prison hospital and 2 men got out. As they disappeared out the door, a girl came out of the infirmary. She deftly climbed into the back of the car and covered the awning behind her. The men took the box out of the hospital, with difficulty brought it down the ladder and put it in the cabin. After a few more minutes, the gazelle left the prison grounds. When Louise once again came to check on the sick woman, she found only an empty bed in the infirmary. Jack was sitting at his desk, filling out inmate cards. I don't get it. Where's the patient? She wondered. You told me to send her back to her cell immediately, Jack explained, as if nothing had happened. Yes? Louise was delighted. Well, that's good. That's just great. Really, Jack. You know, my orders are not up for discussion here. You see, she's quite well. She was able to get back to her cell. Well, be a little harder on them. This is a prison, not a sanatorium. Jack finished the warden's famous line. You see, we understand each other perfectly. The warden turned to the doctor in a satisfied voice, and in a good mood went to her office. She didn't doubt for a second that Wyndham and the wretched woman would take care of Claire that night, and she would be able to work off the money she had received. In the meantime, Claire sat in the back of the car and thought only of how she could get out of there unnoticed. Half of the job was already done. She jumped into the back of the car like she'd been doing it all her life. So while everything went according to plan, gritting her teeth from the cold because she was only wearing a blouse and pants, Claire got farther and farther away from the colony and didn't know what was going to happen to her next. At last, the gazelle came to a stop. The girl heard the men get out and start pulling a heavy crate out of the cab. Jack was not mistaken. Tim was a guy of his own, with whom he easily agreed to help his comrade, and soon Claire could no longer hear their voices. It was a sign that it was time to get out of the back of the truck. Carefully lifting the awning, the girl looked around. She was lucky again that no one was in the yard at that moment. Jumping out of her temporary shelter, she ran around the corner of the house and waited for Tim to leave. The house Ethan lived in she knew well. She'd been to visit him several times. Ethan's plan had worked 100%. Normally, all cars leaving the prison grounds were carefully searched. But that day, when the guards saw Tim's caterer and Ethan's parole officer in the cab, they decided not to check them. Apparently, Ethan had a lot of authority in the colony. Claire stood outside, freezing. Finally, Tim came out of the house. Ethan jumped out of the driveway right after him. Seeing Claire, who was cold, he took off his jacket, threw it on the girl, and helped her to get to the apartment. Claire took a bath first. She washed for a long time, enjoying the delicate scent of the shower gel. It seemed to her that together with the foam she washed away all the prison dirt and disgusting odors while lying in a tub of hot water. She realized what it meant to appreciate ordinary things. A hot bath used to be a little thing she didn't even notice in her everyday life. But in prison, it had become an unattainable dream. Claire didn't know how long she spent in the tub, but when she came out, Ethan had already made lunch. "God, I miss home-cooked food," Claire exclaimed and happily ate 2 plates of Ethan's borscht. "I haven't quite realized that I'm on the outside, that there are no scary women and wardens here." "Wait," Ethan interrupted the girl's enthusiastic speech. "Do not forget that the prison warden has not gone anywhere from you. Here he is sitting in front of you." Claire looked at Ethan in surprise, not understanding what he meant. It was a joke. "Calm down." Ethan tried to talk some sense into her. "You will feel free only when you prove your innocence. You are now wanted, so you cannot show on the street. Do you understand me?" Claire felt as if she'd come down to earth after saying that. There was no trace of her recent euphoria. "I'll be at work tomorrow. I won't be back until 8. If I can, I'll call you and let you know what's going on in juvie. Soon everyone will know you escaped. They'll be after you. They'll be looking for you everywhere," Ethan explained. During the conversation, Claire remembered Kate. She had completely forgotten about her friend. "What's the date today?" she asked Ethan a question. "March 10th. Why?" "With all the recent events, I completely forgot about my friend Kate. She's supposed to be released tomorrow. She has nowhere to go. I hate to ask this, but it's okay. Could she stay with you for a while too?" Claire asked hesitantly. "All right, I don't mind. Let her stay here for now. You'll sleep on the couch in the living room. She might be useful to us in the investigation of your case. I'll give her a note tomorrow with the address. You'll open the door for her, if she gets here before I do. I won't be back until 8 or even 9, as usual," Ethan explained. Claire spent the rest of the day alone. Ethan needed to go to his parents' house. He returned when the girl was already asleep. The next morning, Ethan went to work and left her groceries for lunch and dinner. He reminded her not to open the door for anyone. He also made sure Claire stayed in touch. He gave her a new cell phone, promising to call her if she needed it. Claire realized how dangerous it was for her to be outside. She stayed home and waited impatiently for Kate. At 11 o'clock, the phone rang. The girl picked up the receiver and heard Ethan's voice. "Claire, Kate has been released. I managed to see her and give her the address of the apartment." "Wait for her," Ethan said quickly and disconnected. At 1 o'clock, Kate stood on the doorstep of the apartment. "Claire, I'm so grateful to you and Ethan for sheltering me. I have so much to tell you," Kate said and hugged her friend. "Why me?" "Ethan's the one who's grateful." She hugged her and offered to undress her. She carefully hung Kate's clothes on the rack. "You might want to wash up first, though, don't you? The bathroom's all yours. I'll set the table." Kate came out of the bathroom and was stunned. "I haven't eaten anything like this in 2 years. I'd barely even gotten a parcel from the outside. I've had my private life taken care of." Kate remembered her worries again. "Well, enough about it. The main thing now is to forget about everything and start a new life. I just don't understand how it happened that you ran away. Lara and I lost you yesterday." Claire told her friend about everything that had happened. Kate listened intently and was amazed. The more Claire talked about everything that had happened, the wider Kate's eyes opened with wonder. She had never thought that Claire could take such a risky step and escape from the colony. "You're kidding me. You should have seen the noise in the sewing room this afternoon when Louise showed up. The guard Sam thought you were in the hospital. Louise was sure you'd gone back to the squad, and the doctor played dumb and said he was just following orders. Anyway, it was a comedy. But then, the next day, we all had to do double duty." "But it was okay, the girls did it," Kate said through her laughter. Kate, if I hadn't run away, I wouldn't be alive right now." Claire finished her story. "Claire, have you decided what you're going to do next? You have only one goal now, to find the real culprit and prove your innocence. It's going to be hard to do either one. I get it. My best hope is Ethan. He promised he'd help, and I think he will. Especially since he's the only one who heard the voice of the woman who ordered my murder." Having prepared a delicious dinner, they waited impatiently for Ethan. But the landlord came home not alone, but with a guest. At exactly 9:30 in the evening, on the threshold of the apartment stood two men, Ethan and Jack. "Take us into your friendly company of conspirators," jokingly addressed to the girls Jack, on the way taking off his clothes. "Welcome to the table. Dinner is ready. Hot tea is ready too," Claire said affably and showed the neatly set table. At dinner, the friends discussed Claire's escape and laughed loudly. They didn't yet know how many dangerous adventures they were about to experience. By the next evening, Claire was not feeling well. The escape from prison in the cold back of the Gazelle and the nervous stress had done their job. She fell ill and had a high fever. Ethan, going to work, called Jack, who promised to examine Claire in the evening, and dictated a list of drugs that would be necessary for treatment. Kate ran to the nearest pharmacy, and at the very entrance noticed the warden, Sam. The man stood nearby, scrutinizing all the people going in and out. Trying to stay out of his sight, Kate rounded the corner. She continued to watch the warden. She didn't have her phone with her, so she couldn't warn Claire why she was late. An hour passed, and Sam remained frozen in his place, not about to leave. What did that guy have to lose here? I was hoping to forget his ugly face. And he showed up here, and he can't go anywhere. Kate cursed to herself. After standing in place for almost 2 hours, Sam froze and, rubbing his frozen hands, headed for the nearest cafe. And Kate was just waiting for that. As soon as the warden disappeared from sight, the girl stepped into the entranceway and went up to the apartment. Unsuspecting, Claire was sleeping peacefully on the couch. First of all, Kate decided to call Jack. She knew that Ethan was unlikely to answer her call. The doctor picked up the phone immediately. After listening to Kate, he ordered her not to leave the apartment under any circumstances. Louise had probably suspected Ethan of something and sent a probation worker to keep an eye on him. Ethan returned that evening. By then, Claire was feeling a little better. "Girls, I asked Jack not to come today. Sam had the day off today, but I suspect Louise let him go for more than one day. He's been sent here on a stakeout. I'm the most likely suspect in organizing Claire's escape. That's why our mutual acquaintance has been standing outside the front door most of the day today." "Kate, are you sure he didn't see you?" asked Ethan and looked at the frightened girl. "This is very important. If he sees you here, you can be sure that Louise will guess that Claire is here too. When I went to the drugstore, I don't think Sam was there yet. I didn't notice him until I was on my way back," Kate said. "What are we supposed to do with this now?" "Look, during my time in prison, I've come to understand Sam's nature a little bit," Claire interjected. "He's very efficient. He likes to get ahead. He's not very smart. He's easy to fool if you want to. You described him better than ever." Ethan agreed, "But still do not underestimate him. So we cannot leave the apartment now. Sam is on duty at the entrance. If he thought with his brain, he would try to watch the entrance, hidden from prying eyes," said Kate. "So he wouldn't recognize us," suggested Kate. "We should change the way we look. Ethan, you'll have to buy wigs and some makeup tomorrow, preferably in a different color than our hair. Let our Claire turn from blonde to brunette and me to blonde, but only with a short haircut. We could also use glasses and a couple of scarves. That way we'll be hard to recognize." "Good idea, Kate. It's the perfect way out of this situation. Tomorrow's my day off, so I'll do it first thing in the morning. In the meantime, everyone get some sleep." "The morning is wiser," Ethan replied, and went to his room. In the morning, Ethan was the first to leave the apartment and immediately went to get the things Kate had listed. He realized that he had to act quickly. Looking around, he noticed an elderly woman in a colorful scarf walking her dog. Ethan had never seen her in the yard before, but assumed she lived in the neighboring house, and today she wanted to walk farther than usual. Claire was feeling a little better, but the sickness hadn't receded yet. Jack counseled Kate on the phone about further treatment and promised to call back in the evening. He didn't dare go to Ethan's apartment yet. "What a great guy Jack is," said Kate, to brew Claire some healing herbs. "I spent 2 years in the penitentiary and I didn't know he was capable of such deeds." 2 hours passed without their friends noticing the conversation. Ethan returned with the shopping and announced that no one suspicious from the morning in the yard. Kate tried on the wig. Claire followed suit as well. The new hairstyles and hair color helped the girls become almost unrecognizable. Dark glasses, scarves, and makeup perfectly complemented their new images. "Now we can go out," Kate announced cheerfully. "That stupid Sam will never recognize us." "You know what, girls?" Ethan warned. "We can quickly give ourselves away if we underestimate the enemy's strength. Please be careful." "Okay, Ethan," agreed Kate. "I understand you. I'll do my best not to get hooked." "I have another question now," Ethan said. "Claire, we need to check on your husband first. It seems to me that he was not without him. I could be wrong, but something tells me I'm right. It might be a good idea to get a job at the restaurant where the poisoning happened," Kate suddenly suggested. "By the way, is that an idea?" Claire agreed with her friend. "At one time I could not recruit a full staff of waitresses. Now I do not know how things are, but it's worth a try." "That's what we should do," agreed Ethan. "Kate, let's go there today and try to get a job." In the afternoon, Kate went to the main entrance of the restaurant, trying not to show her excitement. A young girl met her at the door. "Good afternoon," Kate greeted her. "Do you know who you can contact about employment? If you want to work for us, then you'll have to go to the principal. She's in the office right now. Let me show you out. You know, we've been a little short-staffed lately. I've been working here 6 months and we've had so many waitresses in that time." "Why is the job so hard?" Kate asked. "No, it's not. It's just that our Rose makes too high demands on us. And on the appearance pays attention. She only hires brunettes. She refuses all blondes, especially if they have long hair." "Yes, it's really strange," Kate agreed. "What's your name?" "I'm Tiffany." "I'm Kate." Kate introduced herself. During this short conversation, she had learned how to behave with this Rose. As she approached the supervisor's office, she could clearly hear the woman talking to someone on the phone in a high-pitched tone. Kate knocked softly on the door. "Good afternoon. I'm here about employment. My name is Kate. I have a lot of experience as a waitress," she told the woman. "That's good. We're really short on waitresses. I'll take you on, but only on a trial basis. I'd like you to change your coloring, of course. You know, I hate blondes. My name's Rose. How may I address you?" The woman continued her slightly arrogant speech. Kate introduced herself. "Well, Kate, you can get to work now. If that's okay, you can get changed. Tiffany will give you a uniform and explain what to do," Rose said. Kate said goodbye to her new boss and went to look for Tiffany, whom she found near the bar. The restaurant room was empty, so it was safe to distract her with leading questions and get ready to start the day. "What did I say?" The girl turned to Kate. "Thank God you've been accepted. Don't worry. It's only now there's no one in the restaurant. Some nights there's no time to sit down. We need at least 5 more waiters in the evening, especially on weekends. It's just Natalie and me. She's on her feet. It's not a healthy environment." "It was different with the old hostess," Tiffany said, and sighed pitifully. Tiffany gave Kate a uniform to match her size and led her into the hall. The girl explained how to take orders properly, where to get what from, and other restaurant wisdom. When the first customers appeared, she took the order and coped with her task perfectly. "Well done, Kate. You're catching on," Tiffany complimented her. "I hope our Rose will be pleased and keep you on the job." Kate tried to turn the conversation to a topic that interested her. Asked to talk about the poisoning episode, Tiffany described it in the best possible way. After listening to her, Kate began to guess that Rose had played no small part in the story. The working day at the restaurant came to an end, and Ethan, as promised, met Kate and drove her to his apartment. Just to be on the safe side, they entered the entryway 15 minutes apart. No one like Sam had appeared in the courtyard all day, but the friends decided to be on the safe side. Kate recounted everything she had learned during the first day of work. Claire listened attentively to her friend, thinking about something of her own. "Rose is my friend. I know she's looking after my restaurant now, helping Steve. I always thought she was easygoing, outgoing, helpful. And to me it's clear, before you she was simple and sociable, and now she considered herself an important person, and all her former simplicity disappeared, as if it had never happened," said Ethan. "It can't be," Claire protested. "That's the only person I trust without reservation. I could go to her today and tell her about my escape." Don't be in such a hurry, Claire. Ethan intervened. I think Kate is right. We should check out this Rose. I want to take a look at her. Maybe I'll form an opinion about her, too. All the next day, Kate worked like a bee. Unlike the previous day, the restaurant was crowded, so the waitresses had a hard time. Rose never showed up at the restaurant, but Steve, the owner, did show up. Does Steve come here often? Kate asked when the girls had a brief respite. No, about once a week, or even less often. He probably trusts Rose for everything, Natalie, a waitress who was new to Kate, suggested. Both girls were brunettes with short haircuts. Kate returned home without waiting for Rose. This time, Ethan sent a cab to pick her up. Claire reported that 3 men, one of whom was Sam, loomed in the yard in front of the windows. Claire began to recover. Her fever was down. She couldn't wait to get involved in the investigation of her own case. In the evening, Kate told her about the strange phobias of the new owner of the restaurant. After all she had heard, Claire went to the mirror, stroked her long blonde hair, and turned pale. She doesn't have a phobia for all girls with blonde hair, but only for me. That's why she doesn't hire girls who look like me. She figured it out. Kate, looks like you're right. There's something wrong with Rose. Ethan, you need to get on the case now. Maybe she'll show up at the restaurant tomorrow. You should not only look at her, you should talk to her. You remember the voice of the woman you couldn't see in the office of the colony governor, don't you? Of course, Ethan answered confidently. I rather remembered what and how that woman talked about you. You can be sure of that. I will definitely recognize her by her voice. And what to do with the men who grazed near the apartment windows? There are now 3 of them, Claire realized. Here's what we'll do tomorrow. You change your clothes and go to Jack's. It's not safe to stay here. Kate will stay at my place for now. If anything happens, she and I can figure it out. How do you explain the situation after all? Kate was released from the colony and became a free man, Ethan said. The next morning, Claire put on a wig and glasses. Looking at herself in the mirror, she made sure it was almost impossible to recognize her. She called a cab, giving the address of Jack's apartment. Kate, having come to the restaurant, plunged headlong into work. It was only by chance that she found Rose in her office. She called Ethan. He drove up to the restaurant, but did not go inside. He decided to wait for the right moment. And such a moment came only closer to the evening. Between orders, Kate managed to call Ethan. He didn't wait long. Once in the hall, Ethan caught a tentative sign from Kate and realized who exactly was the new principal. Ethan decided not to waste time and sat down at the table opposite Rose, who was in the hall at that moment, and started his game. He tried to attract the woman's attention, looking at her and smiling his special smile. The response from Rose did not have to wait long. She noticed the interest in herself and began to playfully look at Ethan and smile back. Ethan began a systematic siege. He approached her and smiled again. Would a nice girl allow a lonely man to pass the evening at her table? He started the conversation. If the man is really lonely? Of course she would, but I can't believe that such an interesting man would come without a lady. Confess, where did you lose her? Flirtatious, replied Rose. Nicholas. Ethan introduced himself, deciding just in case not to give his real name. Banker. I live and work in another city, and in your city I'm going to open a branch. It seemed to Ethan that at the word banker a light appeared in her eyes. He immediately concluded that in front of him was a real predator who was ready to do anything for money. Kate watched Ethan's conversation with her boss from the sidelines, and suddenly she realized that she was unpleasant to see this man next to another woman, trying to push these thoughts away from her. She continued with her duties. Rose, but you can call me just anyone. Still the same, naively replied the woman. Rose, a lovely name. As is the owner herself, though. Ethan continued his online speeches. Tell me, Rose, do you come to this restaurant often? It was as if she had been waiting for this question, even blushed with excitement. Yes, quite often. In fact, I'm the owner of this restaurant. In addition, I have 2 other restaurants which are characterized by fine cuisine and excellent service. I'm sure you do, Ethan agreed, looking into the eyes of his new acquaintance with a smile. What a hostess is, what a restaurant is. Rose gladly helped the guest with the choice of dish to take the order. Kate came to the table. She wrote down in her small notebook everything that Ethan dictated, and noticed his warm, genuine, interested look, though it might have seemed that way to the girl. Ethan's game continued. He tried to behave casually and tried to learn as much as possible about the new acquaintance. Rose was eager to make contact, obviously hoping for something more, because a real banker was sitting in front of her. Ethan realized from the first minute that the person who ordered Claire's murder was sitting in front of him. He recognized her voice as soon as she said the first sentence. The new day, on the other hand, brought Claire many new shocks. Having reached Jack's apartment safely, she decided to go to the nearest drugstore. By that time, the doctor had already left for work and left the keys in the agreed place. Claire needed to urgently buy the necessary medication, leaving all the things in the room. Claire went outside. There was no one in the courtyard. Only a lonely old woman in a colorful scarf was sitting on a bench and reading something enthusiastically. Claire quickly ran to the drugstore and came back. At the entrance, she didn't pay attention to the man who was staring at the screen of his phone. Taking the key out of her jacket pocket, Claire wanted to open the door, but suddenly she felt someone grab her, put his hand over her mouth, and tried to pull her to the road. A black foreign car came around the corner. The back door opened, and the girl was in the car in seconds. "Hello? Ethan, I don't know where Claire is. We said she was coming to my place. The neighbors say she came for a short time, left the apartment, and never came back." Jack spoke quickly into the phone. Strange, Ethan wondered. Claire couldn't have gone somewhere unannounced. "Listen, Jack, are you thinking what I'm thinking right now?" "Yeah, I think something happened to her. We've probably been tracked. That's the doctor's guess." An hour later, Kate and Ethan were at his place. They'd all had a rough day, but none of them had any idea how it would end. The friends had no idea that Claire had been in a small country cottage all this time. The house was looked after by two men, from whom it was obvious that they had been to the zone more than once. They left the girl in a small room, so that she would not think of escape, handcuffed her wrist and fastened it to a heating pipe. Time dragged on longer than ever. Her arms went stiff, her body whimpered. Suddenly, the door opened and one of her captors entered the room. "But what's resting well?" asked the man in a hoarse voice and looked at the girl with a grin. "I even feel sorry for you. Look, maybe enough to keep me here? I'm a human being, by the way, and I have some natural needs. All right, I'll show you out. But don't try to escape. If you try to escape, we have orders to shoot." The big guy intimidated Claire. He unlocked the handcuffs. The restroom was at the end of the hallway. "I won't be waiting long," the man said. The restroom was quite spacious. Claire hoped it had a window, and there was indeed one at the very ceiling. Looking around, Claire saw a chair. Without thinking long, moved it over to the window and grabbed the window handle. It took a lot of effort for the fragile girl to open the heavy frame. When she leaned out into the street, she realized that it was only about 1.5 meters to the ground. That's when she heard the voice of her bald escort. "Hey, about 3 more minutes in there and I'll be breaking down the door. Come out now," he shouted menacingly. Claire realized she couldn't delay any longer and jumped to the ground. She ran toward a low wooden fence and disappeared into a thicket of young fir trees. The girl was wearing only a light blouse and pants. All her outer clothing had been left in the house. At that moment, she clearly realized that, having escaped from one deadly danger, she had fallen into the trap of another. The insidious March cold could quickly dispose of the defenseless girl alone in the woods. Without outer clothing, she could hardly stand even a few hours. Exactly how long she managed to walk through the forest thickets, she did not know. It began to get dark in the forest. She was unbearably cold. Leaning against a fir tree, she decided to rest and closed her eyes. Only for a moment she thought that someone had touched her shoulder. She even heard someone's voice and lost consciousness. In the morning, Ethan left for work. He made it his top priority to follow Louise. Surprisingly, the day went normally. Ethan asked his partner to take an early shift. As early as 6:30, he was already guarding the warden in the rental car. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Louise left the territory, got into the car, and drove in the opposite direction of the city. Ethan immediately pressed the gas pedal and followed her, doing his best to draw as little attention to himself as possible. Soon they drove into the countryside. At the village itself, Ethan had to slow down to avoid spooking Louise. He noticed that she had stopped her car near a small cottage, leaving the car nearby. Ethan decided to sneak up to the house and try to find out what was going on there. Even behind the fence, he heard the angry voice of the boss, who did not spare foul words. "How could you miss her? A frail girl managed to escape from you two. How could you find the whole forest?" "Scour," Louise shouted. Ethan heard only a few fragmentary phrases, but he realized that Clare had escaped without warm clothes and had probably frozen in the woods. The thought made him uneasy. Did all our efforts only lead to Clare's death? How could we let this happen? How could we have failed to keep her safe? Thoughts flew through his mind. As one might expect, on the way back, Louise's car was parked near the restaurant. Ethan immediately called Kate, who had to be at work that evening. She did not answer immediately. Apparently she was very busy. It was impossible for Ethan to go to the restaurant by himself. His appearance would have confused all the cards. The girl called half an hour later. "Ethan, you don't realize what's going on here at Louise's restaurant, and they are talking about something at the far table in the corner." Frightened, Kate said, "Don't worry, she doesn't care about you. Besides, you're unrecognizable in a wig right now." "And she came to the restaurant for a completely different reason," Ethan began to reassure the girl. Kate decided to approach the table where the women she was interested in were sitting. She managed to hear a few phrases. "Don't worry, Rose, I will fulfill your request." "The bastard will not escape us," Louise said. "I can't be sure of what you're saying. This is the second time she's escaped from you." "How is that possible?" the restaurant manageress wondered. Kate couldn't make out anything else from their conversation. At 11 p.m. the restaurant closed, and Kate hurried to Ethan, who was waiting for her. He told her everything he had learned during the evening, and Kate relayed what she had heard. Ethan frowned, rubbing his temples. "Here's the deal. Rose wants to put her friend out of business and run the restaurants herself, and Louise is just working off the money she received." They went to the new apartment Jack had rented the same day. For security reasons, sitting in the kitchen, Jack, Ethan, and Kate thought about what to do next. Far past midnight, they decided that the next day, Jack would go to the cottage and try to find out if Clare had been found. "Why are we leaving her husband Steve out of it?" Kate suddenly exclaimed. "You're absolutely right." Jack supported Kate's idea. "By the way, I'm not used to being idle, and now I have plenty of time. I found out that Steve owns half of the 6 restaurants, 3 of which he gave to his wife. So why did Clare allegedly try to poison their business partner?" Ethan wondered. "I was able to study some of the nuances of this crime. According to the documents, it turns out that Steve gave the restaurants to his wife, and in fact Clare was only engaged in hiring and monitoring the order. All documents and finances passed through Steve's hands. His partner Mike planned to build a hotel that would work directly with Steve's restaurants. The investigation revealed that many of the documents related to the project did not include the figures originally discussed. Mike had negotiated one amount of money for construction, but the paperwork showed a different amount. I don't know what exactly the men were talking about that night. Mike got a near-fatal dose of poison. Look, maybe we should visit this Mike and find out what he thinks about the whole case, Kate suggested. After discussing some more points of the next day, the friends went to bed. At exactly 6 in the morning, Ethan began to get ready for work. Kate made scrambled eggs, boiled water for coffee. She decided to drive to Mike's office. Jack intended to visit the cottage village from early morning. After breakfast, they all went in different directions. The doctor reached the dacha settlement without any adventures. However, he did not learn anything new there. Meanwhile, Kate arrived at Mike's office. Kate went into the office and explained to the man the purpose of her visit. "Mike, I really want to help my friend Clare." "Do you really think she tried to poison you?" Kate asked him. "You know, there are a lot of holes in this case." That night, Steve and I signed the papers for a mutually beneficial project. We wanted to build a hotel that would work in close connection with his restaurants, or rather, his wife's restaurants. I studied the contracts and didn't see any trickery. All the figures in the papers were the same as those originally agreed upon. I must have trusted Steve too much to notice that he had slipped me copies of the contracts, in which the amount of money for the construction was completely different, disadvantageous to me in all respects. But for Steve, on the contrary, this turn of events was more favorable than ever. At dinner, I did not notice anything unusual. All the dishes were of excellent quality, but from the restaurant I went straight to the emergency room. I still don't understand why he and his wife wanted to kill me. Thanking Mike for the conversation, Kate left the office. It was only that minute that she began to realize why Rose was so eager to get out of the way. The time was approaching 11, and she couldn't be late for work. On the stairs at the main entrance, Kate unexpectedly met Jack. She didn't recognize him until after he'd said his name. Kate couldn't believe how much he'd changed his appearance. An hour later, he was sitting in Steve's restaurant ordering lunch. He brought a newspaper and pretended to study its contents while he scrutinized everything that was going on around him. A woman entered the restaurant and went straight to the door, which had a sign that said, "No trespassers allowed." After about 10 minutes, she came back out. It was noticeable that she was very unhappy about something. A man came out after her, caught up with the woman, and they continued talking. Jack couldn't hear what they were talking about at one of the tables, but he realized they were arguing about something. Jack discreetly took a picture to show his friends. When Jack showed the photo of the strange couple, Kate and Ethan immediately recognized Steve and Rose. Ethan said thoughtfully, "I feel like I need to visit my new acquaintance. She probably already missed her banker. Tomorrow I have the day off so I can visit Rose in the afternoon." The next day, Ethan hurried to the restaurant of his new friend. Rose did not wait long, and in a few minutes she came to the table of her long-awaited guest. "Nicholas, how nice to see you." She greeted the man, smiling. "Where did you disappear? I called you several times, but your number was unavailable. You see, dear Rose, I'm a banker, and it happens a lot to bankers. Big deals require the utmost concentration. I've signed some very lucrative contracts, and I'll be leaving your town soon. So I have a question to you. One question, if you will not agree to go with me?" Ethan said with a smile. Rose had obviously not expected such a turn of events, but she was extremely pleased with the rich banker's proposal. Ethan again noticed the sparkle in her eyes at the thought of big money. "Yes, of course. But I will need to solve some issues." It was obvious that Rose was nervous, not knowing how to react properly to the man's proposal. "Rose, do I understand correctly that you can't leave your restaurant? Well, that's an easy problem to solve. Let's sell it, and you can quietly start a new life in another city." Next to me, Ethan continued to compose the legend. Seeing that the fire of love for his capital in the eyes of the interlocutor flared up not on a joke. "I agree." Rose couldn't stand it and suddenly shuddered. It was at that moment that Steve appeared in the restaurant. He immediately noticed Ethan and Rose. "Steve!" frightenedly fed the woman. "And where are you here from? You're supposed to be at the presentation and you're here without me, spinning everything around other men. I'm not smart. Not for nothing you've been blowing my mind for so many days asking me to sell restaurants." He angrily turned to her. "Come on, Steve." Rose made excuses. "I just wanted what was best. What was best? You wanted to bankrupt me completely." Nothing like that had ever happened under Clare. Steve was even more furious. "Who is this man? Your new lover? Admit it." "Yes, he's my new lover, and I'm going to move to another city with him." Rose couldn't take it anymore and told Steve the truth. Her dreams of a beautiful life had finally driven her crazy. "You're such a jerk." Steve waved his hand and left the restaurant. Ethan sat silently at the table and watched the discussion between the two, completely unknown to him. But with every word he realized what kind of despicable people Clare had connected her life with. When Steve left the room, Ethan looked seriously at Rose and asked her to explain herself. "You see, Steve owns this restaurant and several others. 3 of them were run by his wife, who is serving time in juvie. She tried to send one of the partners to the grave for something. Steve and Clare, that's the name. His wife's been locked up for 6 years," she explained. "But you, Rose, you said you owned these restaurants yourself. Let's tell each other the truth. You're very sympathetic to me, and I'll forgive you for a lot of things. The main thing is that there should not be any ambiguity between us," said Ethan, and discreetly turned on the recorder. "Okay, I'll tell you everything as it is. Clare is my friend. We've known each other for a long time. She was happily married when she got some of her husband's undeserved share of the restaurants. I offered her my help," Rose said with a sneer. "When she went to jail, Steve offered me the run of the restaurants. So I consider myself a full-fledged owner. How long before Clare gets out of juvie?" There's no telling what could happen in the meantime. All right. But what makes you think anything can happen to her? Ethan interrupted his interlocutor. No reason. Rose tried to justify herself. I just assumed. Do not cling to words. But then one more question, if I may. In your dialogue with Steve, you referred to me as your new lover. So Steve is your old lover? Asked Ethan. Yes, he is my lover, smiled Rose. And how long have you been in a close relationship with him? With even more passion, Ethan continued. Is it really that important to you? Well, to be honest, we've been dating for about a year. Claire didn't know anything about our relationship, said Rose, the long-awaited phrase. That evening, the friends had another serious conversation. After discussing everything that they had learned with difficulty, they came to the conclusion that Rose was the culprit of Mike's poisoning. Only how exactly to prove it, they did not know yet. It was also necessary to prove Rose's connection with Louise, and most importantly, none of them knew if Claire was still alive. Several weeks had passed since Rose and Steve's fight at the restaurant. Ethan, during this time, involved in the investigation of his old friend Carl, who has worked for years in the investigative committee and did everything possible to find as much evidence of Louise's guilt. At first, Rose tried to deny her connection with the head of the colony, but Ethan's accusations that she was the one who ordered Claire's murder and the video camera footage became irrefutable proof of the woman's evil intent. Carl was easily able to find 2 male ex-convicts who helped in the execution of the insidious plan. The cowardly warden Sam, who hoped that his testimony against Louise would help him evade justice, was of great help to the investigation. Rose also had to confess to what she had done. Carl conducted an interrogation of the former lovers. Since Steve and Rose had put things right, they had hardly spoken to each other and everyone had tried to blame it on each other. Steve had no idea what his mistress was capable of. His wife's simple-mindedness was something he took advantage of often. Claire, in her naivete, more than once signed documents convenient for Steve and did not even think about the consequences. Rose, on the contrary, did everything to get her friend out of the way. Taking advantage of the fact that Steve came to visit his business partner, added to his tea the strongest drug, which in large doses could lead to death. She got the keys to Claire's car in advance, and after committing the crime, she slipped the vial of the drug into the glove compartment and put the keys next to it. Luba hoped that while trying to find the keys, Claire would accidentally touch the vial, and it turned out exactly as she had intended. Claire was confused by what had happened. In her panic, she looked for her keys and completely missed the small glass vial of medicine. Steve knew nothing of his mistress's scheme. His goal that night was only the contract he wanted to sign with Mike. Rose and Steve accomplished their goals by sacrificing Claire. Steve through the signed documents and Rose through the attempted murder of his lover's business partner. By putting Claire away for a crime she had committed, she became the manager of her restaurants. Her hatred for her friend drove her crazy. She even tried to hire only brunettes, refusing all the blonde girls who even from a distance could even remind her of her former friend. Finally, Rose wanted to get rid of her hated friend forever and ordered her murder. Through her connections, she learned that by asking the head of the colony with a request to kill her friend, exactly could realize her criminal plan. Only the conversation between the two women, overheard by Ethan, saved Claire from death within the prison walls. Spring was already in full force in the yard. It was summer warm outside. On the day of the trial, Ethan, Jack, and Kate held Claire back. Claire had been looking forward to this day, so eager to vindicate herself, but she didn't wait. Why do these thugs continue to live and our Claire doesn't? Kate sighed bitterly. Ethan, Jack, answered nothing. Each of them was thinking about something else. Ethan about the fact that he'd never had a chance to have a heart-to-heart talk with Claire, to tell her that he'd forgiven her. Jack regretted that he hadn't had time to confess his love to her. In the short time they'd been talking to her, Jack had grown to love Claire and knew he could never forget her. But what they all didn't expect was the main thing. In the middle of the trial, the door opened and Claire walked into the courtroom. She was a little pale and had lost a noticeable amount of weight. Accompanying her was a gray-haired old man. Speaking to the judges, Claire said that if it hadn't been for Peter, I would never have been able to look into the eyes of my abusers, the people who had tried to destroy me several times. The husband who took advantage of my trust and cheated on me. I wouldn't have seen Ethan and Jack. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be standing here either. Peter saved me from dying. I almost froze in the woods and only woke up at the old forester's house. When I discovered Clare, the old forester said, I immediately realized that she was in the woods with no outer clothing for a reason. I watched several times afterward as strangers searched for her, and when Clare told me her story, I knew I had to keep her with me until she finally recovered. The trial ended with the defendants receiving substantial sentences for all their crimes. On a warm May evening, Clare was strolling along the seafront with her friends. The young people went into a cafe, ordered wine, and Ethan made a toast. Tonight I would like to raise a glass to all of you, my friends. To the fact that everything ended safely. Clare, you brought us all closer together. Thanks to you, I met the woman of my dreams. Kate and I have applied for a marriage license. We're getting married soon, and we'd like to ask you and Jack to be our witnesses. I'll tell you more. Something has happened that I'm particularly happy about. Kate has been completely cured of the so-called revenge disease. She's put all her seemingly grandiose plans for revenge against John and his mistress out of her mind. What wonderful news about your wedding. Clare rejoiced. We'd love to do it, wouldn't we, Jack? She looked at Jack and found so much tenderness and love in his eyes that she knew without words what he was thinking at that moment. Jack didn't hide his feelings and proposed to Clare too. Clare thought that she could not have been happier. The young couple had a bright future ahead of them. A warm family relationship which was firmly based on the events that had preceded the evening in the cafe. These dangerous adventures showed them that only friendship, mutual trust, and fearlessness helped them to overcome all the obstacles on the way to normal life. They gave all the participants of the tragedy additional confidence that true friends will not fail in moments of danger, will give each other a firm shoulder, and will not chicken out in the face of a real threat.